Yeah, once again, lovely to be here and to see you. And yes, a big welcome from me, particularly if you've come from the course, Transforming Your Life. I hope the course has left you inspired, and I hope that what I say this evening will be of relevance, even if there are some things that I might say which I don't know whether they'll make sense or not. Partly because the talk that I'm going to be giving is the third in a series exploring a particular story from a particular Buddhist scripture called the White Lotus Sutra. The White Lotus Sutra is from later Buddhism. It's the sort of second great phase of Buddhism called the Mahayana. And it's a very, very important, influential scripture in the Buddhist canon of texts and literature. And primarily, the White Lotus Sutra doesn't speak the language of concepts. Primarily, it speaks in terms of stories and parables and images. So Buddhism has these, you could say, two kind of languages. One is a rational, conceptual, pointing to the truth, which is actually beyond reason, but nevertheless you can have concepts that point to the truth that the enlightened Buddha awakened to. And I think the Buddha and Buddhism has always realized that concepts may or may not speak to us very deeply. We need something that speaks to our imagination. Stories and images can sometimes touch us more deeply. And the White Lotus Sutra particularly speaks in terms of parables and stories. And one of those parables is called the parable of the burning house. And last week and the week before, at this class, you've had Yashodhata, I believe, and then, no? Tulapriya and then Padmavajra exploring this parable, and I'm going to carry on. And tonight will be the end. The house will have burnt tonight. So what I'll do, though, is recap a little bit about the parable, and then I'm going to explore a particular aspect to it. I guess with parables and stories and images, myths, you could say, they need analysis, they need exploring, they need unpacking, so that you can decipher the meaning that is contained within them. And Sangharakshita, the founder of this center, the founder of Triratna, the movement that this center belongs to, gave a series of lectures on the White Lotus Sutra, I believe in the 70s, and they are edited into this book. I don't know if this book is actually still available, but the contents of it is available if in another form. This book is called The Drama of Cosmic Enlightenment. Wonderful title. The Drama of Cosmic Enlightenment, Parables, Myths, and Symbols of the White Lotus Sutra. So I'm going to be drawing from that and then adding some little tuppence worth of my own. So as some of you will be familiar, particularly if you've been here the last couple of weeks, the parable involves a house and a family. Particularly, there's the father of the house, the man, and then what's emphasized is that he has lots and lots of children. It's not specified how many, but it's like dozens. And they are all in this huge, dilapidated mansion that he owns. It's dusty, it's dry, it's decaying. It's said to have be haunted. There's ghosts and ghouls in the corners, in the dark corners. And the kids, all his kids, all few dozen of the kids, are playing in the house, in this mansion house. They're running around playing in this house, oblivious to the fact that it's on fire. So not only is it dangerous as a house, in that its health and safety would go silly, it's actually on fire. And the kids are oblivious to this. The father, the man, his wives and servants and other people aren't mentioned. It's just him and his kids in the parable. I guess it keeps it simple. The father isn't inside the house when it's caught fire. He knows that it's caught fire because he can see the smoke from where he is, and he desperately wants to save his children. So he thinks about how to do that. He could try and rush in and try and save them all, but there's too many of them for him to individually find and pick up each one and take them out. He calls to them and he says, the house is on fire, come out now, or words to that effect. And they sort of hear him, and they sort of don't. They ignore his calls, his cries, and carry on playing because they are preoccupied with their toys. They're preoccupied with their toys. So the man realizes that he needs another strategy to bring the children to safety. Excuse me. And what he does is that he shouts out that he's got some toys for them, the likes of which they have never experienced or never seen. These are the best toys that money can buy in India 2,000 years ago. And these toys are, he promises them different types of carts. Yeah, some of the carts are drawn by deer, and some of them are drawn by goats, and some of them are drawn by bullocks. Yeah, and this is all like the fantastic. You know, you have to imagine. I don't know what you have to imagine. Aston Martins and Porsches and Morgans and all sorts of. Although kids might be more into. I don't know what they're into. But anyway, the children suddenly they prick up their ears. Suddenly they're attracted by the promise of shiny new toys, and they come tumbling out of the house. Apparently, they kind of push and jostle their way out. They can't wait to get out of the house. They're oblivious to the danger, but they're drawn to the fact that they're going to get some shiny new toys. And when they come out, the man does indeed give them some carts. And interestingly, he promised them 3 different types of carts: goats, deer, and bullock. Bullock is the biggest and the grandest, obviously, yeah. And he gives them all a bullock cart. So he gives them something better than he promised, even better than he promised. The bullock carts, it's difficult to get cited. They're garlanded with jewels and ornaments, and you know, they're richly arrayed. They're the best bullock carts in the town. Yeah, and each child is saved and is rewarded with a bullock cart. So that's the parable, that's the story, and it needs some unpacking, some interpretation. So the man is the Buddha, and the house is the world, this conditioned world, not just Earth, but conditioned existence, which is the whole of the phenomenal universe, as far as we can discern, is said to be conditioned existence, and it is on fire. It's on fire. It's on fire with the fires. The Buddha, in another teaching called the Fire Sermon, said the world is burning with greed, with hatred, and with delusion. The children are us. We are the children playing in this house, this burning world, which is on fire with greed, hatred, and delusion. It's a house that could collapse at any moment. It will burn us if we stay playing in it. And the Buddha is trying to, as it were, call attention to the fact that we can get out. We can get out of this human predicament. There is another way. And interestingly, the children, aren't that attracted by the notion that they're in danger. They're not that motivated by the fact that they are in imminent danger, mortal danger. They carry on playing with their toys, which is, of course, what we do. I could explore all of that, but that would be another talk, which I believe you've already kind of covered. You know, what are the toys that you and I play with to, as it were, keep us distracted from what's really important in life? And particularly, well, 2 days ago, I was talking about the existential situation where we know that we will one day die. We don't know when that is. And we tend to carry on as if we're immortal. We're going to live forever. We've got all the time in the world. And we waste it on trivia. At least speaking for myself, I still have the tendency to do that, even though I am trying to wake up to, in a way, the potential, not just the importance, but the potential that there is in human life. So yeah, the kids are not that excited by the danger that they're in. And the Buddha, the father, has to find a different way to draw them out. He can't go in and save each child. He can't sort of pick them up and lead them out, just as Buddhism says, look, the Buddha cannot save us. The Buddha cannot, as it were, make you and I into enlightened beings. Nobody can do that apart from ourselves. We're responsible for working on our own minds. For example, meditation, you can sit somebody down and tell them to close their eyes and be silent and watch their breath even. But unless they want to do it, they won't be meditating. They won't be meditating. You have to want to do it. And when it comes to changing your mind, only you can do it. The Buddha is said to point the way, show the way. So it's different from a theistic tradition where you might have a creator God who, if you pray to, will save you. Buddhism doesn't have that. It relies on our own motivation and our own efforts. That's not to say that you can't call on the Buddha. Maybe I'll come on to that later. There are, as it were, forces in the universe that you can call on, but nobody can do it for you. Even then, you have to decide to do it. So what the Buddha does is, or the man in the parable, what he does is give the kids a more attractive alternative to the toys that they're already playing with. He draws them out with a positive vision of what their life could be like. And in a way, that is attractive. That is attractive. Buddhism needs to not just emphasize that the world is burning, that there is suffering in the human situation. We need to remember that it's pointing to a positive alternative, which is unimaginably greater than the experience we usually have of being human, even when our life is going really well. This is an unimaginably greater goal. And the parable is trying to point to that. Bullock carts may not do it. In my mind, they don't quite do it as the goal. And there you go. That's what you get from parables. Actually, it's interesting. Some people many of us probably are drawn to meditation and maybe drawn to Buddhism because there is some unsatisfactoriness, even some suffering, even some pain in their lives. And they have this inkling that meditation, Buddhism may help. Yeah. Nod if that feels familiar, that there's some unsatisfactoriness in your life and you've had this inkling. So that is a valid, very valid motivation. And guess what? If you meditate and if you practice the Dharma, you are likely to find a life that is more fulfilling. That doesn't mean that everything will always work out. Buddhism doesn't promise you everything always working out. In fact, it says that in this conditioned existence, some degree of suffering is guaranteed. But what it says is that we can transcend this human predicament, at least in our consciousness. There's another type of consciousness that's possible for human beings that is ultimately fulfilling, which is untouched, unsullied by the dukkha that there is in conditioned existence, even when there's death, sickness and death. A Buddha's consciousness remains at peace and fulfilled because that consciousness is in touch with something far, far greater. Yeah? So Buddhism's not a theistic tradition in that it doesn't have a creator God, but nor is it atheistic or secular in the sense of this human life and this human consciousness is all that we've got. It's something different. It is a transcendental religion that's saying there is in each of us the potential for a new type of consciousness, a new mind that transcends the limitations of our ordinary human consciousness. Particularly, I won't go into this so much on this talk, but on Sunday I was talking about how ordinary unenlightened consciousness tends to, well, one of the characteristics is that it's divided, it's dualistic, it separates out experience into me in here and world or you out there. Enlightened consciousness doesn't do that. Enlightened consciousness has transcended the dualism of self and other, me and you, self and world even. There's, as it were, a consciousness that's bigger than what I think of me as me. It's like, you could say, it's a bit like the notion of a universal consciousness, and that is our true potential, and that is, I don't know, not just kind of philosophically marvelous, it's full of peace, freedom, beauty, love, bliss. It's completely fulfilling. It's what the human heart yearns for, that complete fulfillment, and we look for it in, well, I was going to say bullock carts, but then that will complicate the parable. We look for it in the wrong places. Yeah, we look for it in the wrong places, and that's our potential. So yes, this notion that there's something very positive that we can move to is as important, if not more important, than this notion that the unenlightened mind is going to encounter suffering, that this world is on fire with the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. You need, as it were, the carrot and the stick. And actually, I think that if you are practicing Buddhism with some seriousness and sincerity, then at some point, I think you have to connect more with the positive vision than with the stick of suffering, yeah, to keep you going. I say that because if you practice sincerely for a few years, chances are your life will improve. Just in an ordinary way, you're likely to feel less blown around by life. You're likely to feel more free. You're likely to feel more content. You're likely to feel that your relationships have improved, etc., etc. You're more able to be yourself in different situations. You're not so worried about what other people think of you. You're more secure in a way in yourself, in your life. And then if you want to carry on, you need a positive vision, But there's more than even that, more than that. So the Buddha's offering, the man is offering these bullock carts. The Buddha's offering us, I don't know, all the beauty that's represented on this shrine, all the beauty of the enlightened mind. So hopefully that gives you a sort of synopsis of the parable. I particularly now want to look at the carts, the different types of carts that were on offer, and the bullock carts that were delivered. Yeah, bear with me. The one of the meanings of this parable in the White Lotus Sutra, and it's a bit technical, it's saying that there is only one true way of practicing the Dharma, rather than the three ways that were represented by the deer cart, the goat cart, and the bullock cart. Yeah. Now, you don't have to worry too much about the three ways, but by the time this sutra was composed, there had been, as it were, three different notions of what enlightenment was. One was that you could become enlightened for yourself by practicing what the Buddha taught. And you particularly did that by overcoming craving and aversion and delusion in your life. You particularly early Buddhism puts a lot of emphasis on overcoming craving. So by stilling all your craving, you could become enlightened according to the let's call it the goat cart. Yeah. So you could do that. The trouble is that's not very attractive, at least for me. I'm not that motivated to just overcome all my craving. Partly because yeah, I don't know, I'm a greed type. There's lots of craving in me, and I like things and life, and I'm motivated by pleasure, and so that goat cart doesn't pull me in. Yeah. There was another vehicle, another car, another school of thought, which said another way, as it were, which is that yeah, you could get enlightened, as it were, all on your own. You didn't even need to follow the Buddha's teaching. You could discover it for yourself. But this was a solitary kind of enlightenment where you didn't even then teach anything. You didn't communicate your enlightenment to anybody. You just sat in your cave or hut or whatever they did and were quietly content and enlightened. It's similar to the first one, but a bit different. The point is that you're not teaching. And I don't see what the point of that is. Later Buddhism was saying, look, if you become enlightened, one of the qualities is compassion, love, compassion, and you will be compelled to help in the world in whatever way you can. And if you're enlightened, that's likely to take the form of communicating enlightenment to other beings. Yep. And the third bullock cart, so that was the deer cart, let's say. The third cart is saying that you, in a way, are trying to gain enlightenment, not just for yourself, but for the sake of every living being, every single being. Because actually, if enlightenment is overcoming this duality between self and other, if that distinction is transcended, then individual solitary enlightenment for myself doesn't make sense. Yeah. We're part of the fabric of the universe. We're woven in. We're part of everything. I'll come back to that. Anyway, maybe that's all a bit academic and we don't need to worry too much about it, but it's good to know that the sutra in this parable was making a particular point at a particular time in Buddhist history. It's not completely irrelevant to us, and I want to come back to that. But first of all, one of the things that Bhante Sangharakshita asks in this commentary is Buddhism is often accused of being escapist. And does this parable not highlight that? Yeah. What do I mean by escapist? Anybody have a thought? What does escapism conjure up for you if you were living a life of escapism?
So I was thinking in the parable that the dad didn't run away, so I don't know how. Sorry, I'm literally thinking escape.
Yeah, no, he didn't run away, but the kids did. The kids ran out of the house. So is that escapism? What would escapism in a negative way, what does that connote, that word?
It's like a running away without facing.
Yes.
things.
Yes, it's a running away without facing things. A running away without facing reality. It's a distraction from the facts. It's not facing up to the way things are, and instead distracting ourselves and running away. And what Bhante says is, look, that is what many of us do all the time in life. We distract ourselves from the facts of life. We run away. At its most extreme, we might run away in terms of drink or drugs or some sort of substance that temporarily makes us forget who we are, what life is, what's important, etc. It's not just drink and drugs. You can think of other forms of distraction that maybe are seemingly more innocuous, but you can think of them, can't you? For me, at the moment, one of my escapist go-to places is YouTube Shorts on my phone. And it's trivial and embarrassing and sort of harmless, and but really a waste of time. And they're short, but they get you hooked in, don't they? They get you nod, because I don't want to be the only one. There's all these kind of blank expressions that, who is this guy trying to teach us Buddhism? Anyway, actually modern culture has invented so many ways of distracting ourselves. I think that distraction has never been such a danger as there is for us in our 21st century technological age. It's there at every fingertip. It's there calling out to you all the time. And that's escapism. What Bhante is saying is, look, running out of the burning house that is samsara, freeing yourself from this burning house, that's not escapism. That's actually facing up to the truth. That's facing up to how things are. He says that maybe a better word than running out of the house, escaping, would be transcending. What the kids are doing is transcending their predicament, their human predicament, transcending their human predicament. Bhante talks about actually all life, every single being, human or otherwise, wants to grow. That is somehow the principle of life. It's growth. You could say it's growth and development. We want to feel that our lives are fulfilled. And one of the ways that we achieve a sense of fulfillment is if we feel we're growing in some way. Does that make sense? Or contributing to the growth of others, helping in the world. That feels like a very, very basic urge in human beings and in all life. And Bhante says, he says, any kind of life that involves no positive, deliberate effort to evolve is escapism. Any kind of life that involves no positive, deliberate effort to evolve is escapism. So he's reading this parable in the way that I think is meant by the White Lotus Sutra, which is not as distracting yourself, but as evolving and transcending your limitations, the limitations of the unenlightened mind. Yeah. Yeah. But to go back to this kind of one way, one of the things that Bhante talks about is that, look, even in Buddhism, you've got different sectarian approaches. You've got different types of Buddhism. Many, many different types of Buddhism have evolved over its history of over 2,000 years. You know, the Buddhism that's practiced in China or Japan or Sri Lanka or Tibet or Mongolia, they look very, very different. They look like, on the face of it, completely different religions. The differences are greater, at least at first glance, than you might find in, say, Christianity, the different sort of sects of Christianity. It's like they become so different, at least on the surface, that yeah, it's hard to see that they're the same religion at all. And Bhante was very concerned, Bhante Sangharakshita was very concerned that for the modern Buddhist, the sectarian approach where we aligned ourselves with Zen Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism, or with Theravadan Buddhism as it's practiced in Sri Lanka, or I don't know, Pure Land Buddhism as it's practiced in Japan, that was not, I don't know, that was a sort of artificial way of doing it. Partly those different types of Buddhism have evolved in their own cultural climate in isolation from each other largely. And they involve large doses of that climate's culture. So if you want to practice Tibetan Buddhism properly, you have to immerse yourself in Tibetan culture. Some people even have to learn Tibetan to do that, and it's a whole culture. It's like a I don't know. It before Buddhism, there was a religion called Bon in Tibet with its whole kind of shamanic tradition, and that has influenced how Tibetan Buddhism has evolved. And it's got its own hierarchies and, I would say, superstitions, and it's a very magical culture, which is very different from Theravadan Buddhism in Sri Lanka, which is very rational and almost psychological, you could say. What Bhante is saying is, look, Buddhism, if you look deep enough, is one unified whole. And if you can look deeply enough at what unifies Buddhism, if you can look at the principles, discover those unifying principles which underlie the different schools and forms, then you can practice Buddhism in your culture without adopting some other Eastern cultural form. And you can draw on what's best in your culture, because Western culture, for example, because we're here, that has a lot to offer us. Yeah. I come from an Indian background where I was brought up in a Hindu culture, and Hinduism never convinced me, but nevertheless, there's quite a lot in Indian culture that I value. Yeah, and I don't have to leave it behind. I don't consider myself wholly aligned with Indian culture because I was brought up in England. I don't wholly align myself with English culture. I feel myself to be a Buddhist trying to practice the principles of Buddhism as I've been given them, as it were, regardless of cultural conditioning. Does that make sense? So Bhante Sangharakshita was very, very clear that there's a unifying underlying principle in Buddhism. And he reads this parable in that way. He's saying that actually Buddhism is one, and you can practice it in any particular country or culture or time. And I mean, there's an irony, because in articulating this view, in articulating these principles, what he's done is create a Buddhist movement that is now Triratna. And in a sense, now Triratna is a movement amongst lots of other Buddhist movements. So in a certain sense, there's an irony, but the way that we practice is by going to the root principles. And the root principle that Bhante goes back to is that to be a Buddhist is to go for refuge, i.e. commit your life to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that commitment, or going for refuge, which is the traditional language, happens on deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper levels until enlightenment. And he sees that that is a common strand or common underlying principle in all of Buddhism. Now, that might not seem very important to you when you start to practice. Like if you've just learned to meditate and you've just come to the Buddhist Center a few weeks ago, it might seem like all this is theoretical and maybe a bit arbitrary. Just bear it in mind. Just bear it in mind, because if you want to carry on practicing at the Cambridge Buddhist Center, it's quite good to know what sort of Buddhism is this. What sort of Buddhism is this? It's a new form of Buddhism that is trying to go to the roots of what Buddhism is in a principial way and draw inspiration from the whole of the Buddhist tradition, because we are now heirs to that whole Buddhist tradition. We can study the White Lotus Sutra without necessarily aligning ourselves with this as the only text. There is a school of Buddhism that does just that. It says the White Lotus Sutra is the only Buddhist text that you need to read. And in a way, they don't even read it. They just chant the name of the White Lotus Sutra, and they say that that is all you need to do. Might be valid, who knows? I'm not saying that that is wrong. All I'm saying is that that's not Triratna's approach. The Triratna's approach is to explore and draw inspiration from the whole of the Buddhist tradition. And you can only do that if you understand its unifying principles. Anyway, that's one of the meanings of these different carts being offered, and then the bullock cart being the one that's actually given. The biggest is given, as it were. I think Bhante was just a genius. I was saying this yesterday in a group that I was talking with. He discovered he was. I love talking about him. He's not alive anymore, and many of you won't meet him. For me, he is my teacher. He doesn't have to be your teacher. We would, in a way, if you've never met him, he might you might not feel that affinity with him as your teacher, and that's okay. But for me, he's my teacher, and he's the founder of this tradition. And I think he was a genius. He was a spiritual genius, and he was a genius, I think, just on an intellectual level. He was a sort of child prodigy. He discovered that he was a Buddhist on reading a text called the Diamond Sutra and the Sutra of Huineng when he was 16. He'd already read Kant and Milton and about many other schools of Buddhism and religion and all sorts of things. Anyway, he had a huge mind. He discovered he was a Buddhist, not by an intellectual understanding. He had, I think, a glimpse of the enlightened mind when he was 16. Maybe it was a glimpse of a glimpse, but it was enough to change the course of his life. And at 17, he wrote a paper called The Unity of Buddhism. And it was published in the Buddhist Society's journal, The Middle Way. And when he turned up at the Buddhist Society offices, where they're based in London, they couldn't believe that this paper was not written by some middle-aged academic, but was written by this 17-year-old boy who'd just been conscripted into the army and was going to be sent off to India, little did he know, where his life would take on an extraordinary journey. Anyway, he was concerned about the unity of Buddhism. That's what he wrote about. And I think that's very, very important, because I think he saw that Buddhism was the way to address this need that all life has to grow. He talked about Buddhism in terms of evolution. You may be familiar with this. What he didn't mean evolution in a particular, say, Darwinian mechanistic sense. He didn't have a particular theory of evolution, not in that scientific sense. He was using the word evolution in its broad general sense, which is to grow and develop. And what he said was that, look, human life has emerged from a process of evolution over millions of years, to the point where we've got this type of mind, this consciousness that is able to reflect on itself, self-reflect, be self-aware in a way that simple animals don't do. Somebody will probably say dolphins do. Maybe they do. Octopuses probably have very intelligent ways of thinking with all their arms and so forth. But certainly a slug will probably not be moving around in the garden thinking, you know, what am I doing with my life? And does she love me? And am I an attractive slug? Because a slug doesn't have a self-reflective capacity. It has instincts, animal instincts, that respond to stimuli and eat, or I was going to say run, but whatever, you know, it's sort of slug slither away. Yeah, it's now we have those instincts as well. And we human beings have evolved. If you've evolved in a healthy way, you have a capacity to reflect on yourself. Now that capacity can lead to a lot of pain. You look at the mental health crisis that so many people are in the West. That wouldn't happen if we didn't have the self-reflective capacity. Because self-reflection can lead to you reflecting on the past, having regrets about the past. You can have hopes and desires about the future that are not met. You can be disappointed. You can be bereft, bereaved, lonely, anxious, feel inadequate, a failure, all things that a slug wouldn't feel, because we have the capacity to reflect on ourselves, self-reflect. And that evolutionary kind of capability is also an advantage. It's enabled us to create a world where, I don't know, we've used rational thought and reason to develop a technological world where a lot of people have been lifted out of poverty and are living better lives than they were, I don't know, a few hundred years ago. Yeah, in some ways we've advanced. In other ways, one wonders. What Bhante is saying, when he was talking about evolution, he was saying the next phase of evolution, once you've got this self-reflective awareness, the next phase of evolution is to work on your mind. It's not going to be a physical evolution. I mean, maybe there might be physical changes. I don't know. We might grow taller, or I don't know, bigger. Americans are bigger, aren't they? So maybe we're all getting bigger as we get healthier, or I don't know. But really, it's not a physical evolution that will be what takes us forward. It's an evolution of consciousness that will take us forward. And what Bhante is saying, he terms this the higher evolution. And he's saying, and I think this is the vision that he had, he said that We have a choice. We have in a way, human beings have this choice to either evolve their consciousness or to stay in this burning house, which might just burn us away. Yeah, it might just burn us away. I think we are in a dangerous predicament as a species. We know that. I don't want to sort of lay on. We kind of know that if we reflect on it. And sometimes we feel helpless. We think, okay, what am I going to do about all the different world problems and issues? Well, what this vision is saying is that you work on your own mind and you help others to work on their own mind, because the world's problems, at least the human-made world's problems, are not going to be solved at their own level. I think Einstein said this, that if you've got a problem, you don't solve it. You can't solve it on its own level always. You have to rise to another level in order to solve the problem. And that is another level of consciousness. The wars in this world, the wars that are happening now, are happening because of that human consciousness is still mired in greed and hatred and delusion, hasn't transcended this duality between self and other, because we don't really empathize with all life. So we polarize on the basis of race, religion, whatever it is, and we land and we kill each other. That is, I don't know, that's worse than what animals do to each other. Do you know what I mean? Animals won't do that to each other. They might kill to survive, but this is different. This is the fires of greed and hatred and delusion that are burning. And those, of course, there will be a need for social and political change. And maybe diplomacy is the answer for solving some of these conflicts in the world. But tell you what, there will be, if even say you solved the Middle East crisis that's been going on for decades, the conflict in the Middle East, which is horrific at the moment, even if that was solved through diplomatic and political means, and that feels a long shot at the moment, even if that were the case, there will be other wars. There will be other dictators or tyrants, or there will be other wars, unless human beings transcend the limitations of greed, hatred, and delusion, and that is a consciousness thing. So Bhante has this vision that all life is trying to evolve, that the future of our species, in a way, the future of life, is about evolving to a higher level of consciousness. Particularly for human beings, we've got that capacity. Buddhahood represents, as it were, the pinnacle of what human consciousness can become, what consciousness can become. And even Buddhahood, Bhante says, it's not like you become enlightened and then you just stay static. It's a never-ending unfolding of creative mental states. It never stops. It never stops. But all greed, all trace of greed and hatred and delusion has been overcome in the enlightened mind. I think this message of the evolution of consciousness, maybe it's starting to reach people in not just Buddhists, but other people in the world. As Buddhists, I think we have a role and a vital role to play, not just because we've got a monopoly on that evolution. We haven't. Lots of people are growing and developing their consciousness in different ways. But I tell you, Buddhism has such clarity on what that means. It has such amazing practices to help you develop your mind, And it has a better understanding of what a transcendental consciousness is than any other school of thought that I've come across. It points the way more clearly, and it has a better understanding. I think theistic religions, they can, at their best, point the way somewhat, but I think they get mired in a metaphysics that's messy. As soon as you have a creator God, for example, you can say, well, why is there so much suffering in the world? If it's a creator that's omnipresent and all-powerful and so forth, omniscient and all-powerful. Or that creator God is easily envisioned as some sort of judgmental figure that will punish or reward, and then you get into guilt. And many theistic religions actually are just mixed up with cultural prejudice. When you think about the notion of God, any God that is, I don't know, fussed about your sexual orientation isn't worth the trouble of even naming. Yeah, it's just childish to think that God is worried about who you sleep with or how you have sexual enjoyment. What a petty. Do you see what I mean? That's just culture. That's just cultural. Einstein had this notion of 3 types of religion. Are you familiar with that? I have talked about it here before. He had this notion of 3 types of religion. He said that, look, there's religion based on fear, which is about supplicating the forces of nature. So early human beings would have been frightened of natural forces, volcanoes and storms and earthquakes and so forth. And so there's a sort of religion based on fear. And ancient Greek culture. I've just come back recently from Florence, and it's fantastic looking at some of the sculptures and remnants of Roman, in that case, Roman civilization, the gods and so forth, the legends, the myths. And you could say, at least from this very simplistic Einstein's categorization, you could say that was a sort of religion that was based on supplicating natural forces that weren't understood because it was sort of pre-science. Yeah, that's one type of religion. I know you could argue against that, but let's just see what Einstein has to say. He's worth listening to. The second type of religion that he talks about is a religion that is concerned with maintaining some sort of social order, and civilization, human civilization. And many of the world's religions are mainly concerned with maintaining some sort of social order. And what they do is they co-opt a god, a creator god, who gives a certain set of rules about a social order. Do you see what I mean? And you're treated as fine as long as you conform to those set of rules. If you don't, if you sleep with the wrong type of people, then you're out and you're going to be punished. Yeah. So that's the sort of second type of religion. And of course, the trouble is that each social order in each different country and culture is different. So now that we have an international community where we're not isolated from each other, you get the terrible conflicts between different religions. Yeah, that makes sense. So social order. And then the third type of religion he called a cosmic religion. He said that it was a universal religion, a cosmic religion that was about realizing reality and the way things really are, aligning yourself and realizing the way things really are. He said that from that perspective, he was a religious man. He said, from that perspective, I am a religious man. And he then went on to say, and he was writing, I don't know when he was writing, in the 30s or 40s or even the 20s, I don't know when he was writing this. He said that all religions seem to contain elements of all 3 categories, but Buddhism, above all, is a cosmic religion. It's a cosmic religion. And he knew that from reading Schopenhauer. He said, from the writings of Schopenhauer, we know that Buddhism is above all a cosmic religion. He didn't go as far as saying he was a Buddhist, but Anyway, that's still pretty good. So I think Bhante has that vision. I think he says, look, human beings, religion, the point of religion is to reveal to us and align ourselves with the way things are, with reality, with the truth, with the cosmos, with what life is, what it is to be conscious. He sees that Buddhism is par excellence the way to do that. There probably are mystics of other traditions. I know that there are Christian mystics that he read and quoted from. I'm sure there are mystics of other traditions, Hinduism, Islam, etc., that have probably got something similar to say as what Buddhism has to say, but mostly those mystics are persecuted in their own religions as being heretical. Whereas Buddhism is, in a way, a mystical religion. It's saying, no, you can transform your mind, your consciousness, to the point where it transcends what we normally think of as human consciousness, and into a whole new type of consciousness, which is barely imaginable to us. You may have glimpses of it. You may have glimpses of it at your peak kind of experiences. But it's possible to realize it completely and to free yourself from this human predicament. Okay, so I know that I'm running late. Let me just read you what Einstein says, and then I want to end with two images. Because this is, I think, what is the meaning of this parable in the White Lotus Sutra. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. A human being experiences themselves, their thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest. This is the dualistic consciousness, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to the affections of a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. To that extent, he was a religious man. And that's what Bhante is saying Buddhism is potentially therefore in Triratna. I want to finish with two images, not from the White Lotus Sutra, but well, one from the film Oppenheimer. Did you see the film Oppenheimer? The last image in that film, Oppenheimer was known as the father of the atomic bomb. And in the last image of that film, you enter into Oppenheimer's mind, and the horror of this image is, well, he fears that in inventing the atomic bomb, he's unleashed a force that will lead to the destruction of the world. And the image that you enter in his mind is of the Earth from, as it were, seen from space, and all these atomic bombs being fired one after another, and the whole of the Earth being set alight and being on fire. I think that is an image of the burning house for our modern age, and it's a horrific image. It's a horrific image. I want to leave you with one more image. What Buddhism says is that, look, if you woke up to the enlightened consciousness, if you really realized your true potential, you'd see not only are we not separate, there's something magical going on where every thing contains every other thing somehow. not only are we not separate, we are in each other, and the whole universe is in each of us. Buddhism, there's a quote that says, every grain of dust in this universe contains all the Buddha worlds in the 10 directions and the 3 times. Every grain of dust in this universe contains the whole. It's what Blake envisioned when he said to see the world in a grain of sand. The image that I want to leave you with is from the Indian tradition, it's Hindu and Buddhist, of a net of jewels. It's Indra's net, and it's an infinite net that spans all time and all space, and that every node in that juncture of that net is a jewel, and every jewel reflects every other jewel in the universe. This interconnectedness that is incomprehensible to the rational mind is what the enlightened mind wakes up to. And when you experience that, there is just wonder and there is love. I'll leave it there. Thank you.